Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the 2024 H.C. Wainwright 26th Annual Global Investment Conference. My name is Dr. Jade Montgomery, an Associate Research Analyst at H.C. Wainwright, and I'm happy today to introduce our presenter for this session, Matthew D'Onofrio, CEO of Evoke Pharma, a biopharmaceutical company focused on gastrointestinal disease. Matthew?
Thank you, Jade, and welcome everyone to our presentation regarding Evoke Pharma. I would encourage you to look at our appropriate disclaimers on our website and otherwise. Evoke Pharma is a pharmaceutical company that is completely focused on gastroenterology and developing and now commercializing a product to treat gastroparesis. We have one product that has been approved by FDA called GIMOTI, which is a nasal formulation of metoclopramide to treat persons who have this problem associated with gastroparesis. And it provides a unique and important way to directly treat patients who have this disease. We're exclusively focused on commercializing this product and driving revenue, and we're headquartered here in sunny San Diego. Our current strategy is to first of all inform the public and physicians regarding the need for an alternative route of delivery to treat gastroparesis, because in this particular disease, we believe that can improve outcomes in patients. And then establishing GIMOTI as the market leader in terms of showing the comparative outcomes data that we have, along with other important information to market it as the best choice to treat persons with this disease. And finally, now currently improving the fulfillment and delivery of product to patients through our partnerships with especially pharmacies and through healthcare professional education around the appropriate way to gain the product. Gastroparesis is a disease where the stomach stops functioning normally. This is typically found in diabetic persons who have nerve damage to the stomach, which means that in those persons, they are unable to have their stomach function in a normal way. For you and I, who may have normal stomach emptying processes, if we eat a meal, breakfast in the morning at 8 a.m., over 4 or 5 hours, this food in the stomach goes through peristalsis and eventually is allowed to depart the stomach through the lower valve in the stomach and enter into the intestine, which is where it is absorbed for nutrition and hydration. It is also where the vast majority of medications, pills, are absorbed in the human. Unfortunately, in these people who have gastroparesis, this delayed gastric emptying may cause extra hours or maybe extra days of time before that meal, as well as pills, are able to move into the intestine for absorption. And what you see here is a visual description scoping the inside of a patient's stomach, where you literally see undissolved tablets sitting inside a person's stomach, which can happen. And we have reports of it from physicians and gastroenterologists who find medications unable to be used and absorbed by these patients. Currently, and for many, many years, the only treatments were generic oral pills to be used for these persons, which only haphazardly can make it into the intestines for absorption. The recommended treatments by the American Gastroenterology Association are oral or nasal metoclopramide, otherwise known as Reglan. Our product, GIMOTI, which is nasal metoclopramide, has also been recommended by the AGA. They have two sets of actions that the drug actually performs. One is it's a great antiemetic for those persons who suffer from nausea, which is a very common situation for these persons. It helps with that. And secondly, it also helps with motility, allowing the stomach to actually pass the food in the intestines. Apart from that, there are other medications for motility or symptoms, which these patients are often on, but all of them are generally pills. And that creates really two problems for these patients. One, either too much drug, where they're collecting multiple doses of product into the stomach over the course of a day or two, and then all at once they get flushed into the intestine, where they absorb perhaps multiple doses of the same product along with other medications all at once. This is creating a very high Cmax spike of medications and potential safety issues for these persons. Or too little drug. Many of these patients will collect pills in the stomach and then vomit them out. The nausea and vomiting is a common issue for these persons. And we often read about these persons' plight online and their description of really, unfortunately, having to reach down into the toilet, scoop up, and sometimes swallow those same pills yet again. It's very, very difficult for them. This is why we created GIMOTI. This is a nasal formulation of metoclopramide, and it avoids those problems described with pills. you get a known dose of medication that's absorbed directly through the nasal mucosa in the nose. And that allows these persons to be able to take medication regardless of what's going on with their stomach, which may be delayed that day or maybe not, as well as being able to take medications while they're feeling nauseated, sometimes vomiting, and not vomit up the medication. This bypasses the problem in the GI tract and allows for treatment regardless of the situation. The FDA themselves in our approval package made comment on the need for an alternative dosage form, describing the need for alternatives to oral solid medications, as well as other documents where they've described that these patients who have diabetic gastroparesis may experience further derangement of their glucose control because of unpredictable gastric emptying and altered absorption of orally administered drugs. This is all describing exactly what's going on with these patients. Typically, their treatment journey is quite lengthy. They'll oftentimes start off with some changes in their diet, smaller meals, more liquid meals, and typically oral and sometimes now nasal metoclopramide or nasal GIMOTI. Second line, they're oftentimes moving to GIMOTI, especially when that oral doesn't function correctly, and sometimes other medications that were described previously for nausea and other things. And if those fail, then after that, they're typically moving on to surgery. And there's a couple different approaches. One is a implantable gastric stimulation device, which is very expensive, has not been formally approved by FDA as of yet, or what's called a GPOM. And this is a rather new surgery that also has relatively limited efficacy data. In some patients, it may seem to work, in others, it doesn't at all. We view that as the patients move up the diagram here on the right, there's more and more opportunity for GIMOTI to step in because there are so few situations where patients are fully satiated with their original treatment. A lot of our market research would describe at least half of patients that are out there are unsatisfied with their current treatments and looking for alternatives. We compared nasal to oral in a retrospective real-world analysis of patients, 257 patients on oral versus 257 patients on nasal, and tracked them over 6 months of time to see how those persons interacted with the healthcare resources out there in our society. How often did they visit offices? How often did they go to the ER? How often did they get admitted to hospitals? And we found statistically significant reductions in hospital visits, ER visits, and office visits for these persons. This is really important given that these persons tend to go to the hospital about 4 times a year, and they're not there for just a night. They're usually admitted for about a week at a time, which is, of course, very costly. And the analysis behind this, looking at costs also, is a great improvement, which is what we see here. The persons who were on the nasal saved on average $15,000 over the persons on oral, even when you consider the higher cost for our proprietary formulation. That alone, we believe, is important in terms of describing the benefits to patients along with insurers and otherwise. There's a large market of, unfortunately, gastroparesis patients here in the US. A lot of it is being driven by the prevalence of diabetes, which is still growing in the United States. Somewhere between 12 to 16 million persons in the US have symptoms. Around 2 to 3 million patients are actively being treated, with the vast majority of those persons being female. Similar to other GI motility problems like irritable bowel syndrome, unfortunately, the prevalence is much higher in women. The market for this is very high in terms of dollars, 3 to 4 billion many years ago, with larger and larger expenses associated with that. And it's really driven by the extended hospitalizations and continued hospitalizations. Around 30% of these persons who are hospitalized are back into the hospital within 30 days. So that recidivism is very expensive. And there's really only one non-oral product on the market that's being commercially marketed, and that is our product, nasal metoclopramide or GIMOTI. And then lastly, there is another very interesting component to what's going on in the GLP-1 market, which, of course, this was originally developed for diabetics. We have seen that one of the methods of action for the GLP-1s is that they actually slow down gastric emptying, similar to gastroparesis or delayed gastric emptying. This has created a number of GI issues for these patients. And we've seen more recently comments and even some lawsuits associated with gastroparesis. That means that those persons who are taking GLP-1s are at risk for getting gastroparesis. And even if the numbers are relatively small, this may end up having an outsized effect on the market for treating gastroparesis. Again, this is something that is such a juggernaut in society today. The number of persons going on the GLP-1s is truly astonishing. And it probably provides a great benefit, but in certain situations, the GI problems may create the issue that we're treating today. So how have we been doing? Well, we have been striving to focus and establish, our product in terms of delivering a different route of administration, showing the benefit, showing the data that describes that in terms of efficacy and safety, which we have, and then driving through fulfillment of the product that we're currently marketing through specialty pharmacies and other HCP education. This has led, while not as fast as we'd like, to a continued growth of new prescribers and interested prescribers in the market space. We call on gastroenterologists primarily, and we continue to receive and get more and more new prescribers into our group of persons who are prescribing GIMOTI. This has led to greater demand of our product with growth in terms of new RXs, total RXs, which includes refills, over the course of the last many quarters. This has then translated, of course, into improving net revenue, with the most astonishing growth during just Q2 of 2024. Again, small numbers as we stand, but continue to drive at a larger and larger pace. This is driving toward our goal of achieving profitability. We maintain a very small, lean operation with partnerships for commercialization and other types of activities so that our headcount remains small. And the goal is to be able to achieve a profitable company in the near term. We put out specific guidance around that in the past. Here's some of the more specific information regarding our balance sheet and capitalization. Revenue, again, as it continues to grow over the last many quarters, quarter-over-quarter growth, we are pleased to see it continue to move in the right direction, with gross profit improving along with other activities as well. So our goal remains, again, to attain profitability in the near term. How are we doing this? Well, we're doing this through a number of different activities, which I'll drive to right here. First and foremost, there's a number of different components to delivering GIMOTI and the product to our patients and through our physician targets. First and foremost, with a small company and relatively low payer coverage, it does take some time to drive through prior authorizations, but we are getting very good at that and feel more and more confident with that in terms of the relationships that we built around some of the organizations that help us with that process. And then secondarily, developing other relationships with additional pharmacies to deal with out-of-network prescriptions as the insurers become more and more sophisticated with very specific information around what kind of pharmacies or which pharmacies will fill what prescriptions. Also, the communication with patients in terms of helping them understand when a prescription is sent in, how the prescription is being adjudicated, how we're helping to fight for them, and what programs we have in place to support them through the copay process. And then finally, the last few ideas are really focused on the physician. Number one, helping them to prescribe into the correct specialty pharmacies so that it doesn't end up at the retail pharmacy on the street corner, because we don't distribute to every pharmacy. So by getting them into the correct pharmacy at the beginning, it definitely helps to drive adoption and usage of the product. And then helping them understand the specifics to GIMOTI itself, which is number one, what are the benefits of the nasal versus the oral, given the data we just described around the changes in outcomes because of it, and the benefits they see in their patients. And we're getting enough stories and comments back from physicians. We know that they're starting to see that as they use this for their individual patients. And then lastly, concerns about tardive dyskinesia. And this is a well-known side effect for many older antipsychotic medications and has been rarely reported associated with metoclopramide. Most of the recent data that we have been able to develop, along with other comments from the AGA, would describe it as being a very uncommon experience or scenario for these patients. So we still educate the physicians to understand what's the true incidence rate of it, because in the past, some of the information that had been developed was a bit, shall we say, outdated and didn't describe the correct numbers for that. That is actually described here in a paper or abstract that was submitted a couple of years ago to DDW, where it described that the actual incidence rate of tardive dyskinesia is 0.1%, whereas some of the prior papers from 5, 10, 15 years ago were describing incidence rate maybe 10, 15% versus something that's logarithmically lower. So the actual occurrence of this is far, far less likely. And we continue to educate physicians so they understand the actual true incidence rate. We've partnered with a group called Aspen Pharmacies, associated with the specialty pharmacy adjudication process. They act as our central hub to receive, adjudicate the prescriptions as they come in, work with insurers to make sure that they are able to get approval for those, and then communicate with the patients how to receive that. We received the automation process and conversing with those patients, and then should there be no coverage, helping them with some of the various support programs that we have in place to deal with coverage, as it were. This has allowed us to expand the number of patients who are actually getting their product approved, and it has been increasing quarter over quarter in terms of the percentage of persons who are getting more and more approvals, along with accelerating the time frame it takes to get from a prescription coming indoors to then turning around and going back out. So that's been very helpful in fulfilling the need to send medications out to the patient and helping the physician understand that we're working on their behalf. We've also entered into a large-scale relationship with a group called Eversana Life Sciences, associated with really all of our commercialization. It was the first full-scale or fully broad commercialization agreement that was put in place, to our knowledge, where Eversana really does act as the majority of all of our commercialization activities, from sales, marketing, also distribution, and then a number of other components around that. They also, furthermore, are partnered with us financially. And what that has meant is that they have been supporting the product launch of the product through their resources and personnel, and are being repaid through the revenues that come in. And for those revenues that, shall we say, those fees that have not yet been covered through the revenues, those will continue to get paid off as we continue to drive revenue forward. So it has allowed us as a small company to remain very financially efficient, and to move forward with the appropriate types of team and organization to be able to be effective in the eyes of physicians and our target market. On the Evoke side, we continue to handle things around intellectual property, all of our regulatory filings, SEC, financial reporting, and all the manufacturing associated with the product. The sales team is targeted primarily in the South, Southeast, with a smattering across the Midwest. And this is really the areas where you find the greater activity and or prevalence for diabetes, along with the oral metoclopramide prescriptions. It also matches up very well with our prior clinical trial sites that we can utilize during our development process. All these different groups and territories are manned by an Eversana sales rep that is 100% dedicated and labeled as Evoke Pharma sales representative, and their entire focus is to promote and drive prescriptions of GIMOTI. So as I described, this complete commercialization partnership, it's really a one of a kind, or at least it was at the time. I think they're doing this more often now, in terms of both what Evoke receives, which is all the different organizational aspects associated with commercialization. And then Eversana, of course, receives the upside associated with product revenue as we drive it. And then we continue to work together through the end of 2026, unless one party decides otherwise. But at this point, with everything moving in the right direction, we feel pretty confident to move forward. In terms of the competitive landscape in gastroparesis, unfortunately for the patients, there really are not many products that are out there in development. There have been many over the years, a good 10 or 11 that have been in development over the last decade, and all of which have failed. The only product that has been able to get through and be approved is GIMOTI, which has left really just a few more that are much further back in development. Should they actually be able to prove any efficacy, which none have to date, we believe there's several, maybe 5 years further out before anyone could possibly make it to the market. In terms of our intellectual property, we have patents that take us out into 2030 currently, with several others that are currently in prosecution with the USPTO, which we'll be looking to, of course, move forward on as well. And with that, I appreciate very much your time today. My goal to hit 20 minutes, I think, has been hit, and we look forward to taking any questions at the appropriate time or through our organization as needed.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for that fantastic presentation. I'd also like to extend a thank you to all of our presenters this year, as well as everyone who took the time to watch this presentation. I hope you have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you.